everybody. Welcome back to another episode on Easy Ease. In this episode, we're going to talk about your portfolio got the interview, and here's the skills will get you the job. So we're going to go beyond the flashy reels and stunning visuals to uncover what truly sets successful motion designers apart. While a strong portfolio might land you an interview, it is the often overlooked soft skills that secure the job and foster a thriving career. We will be diving into essential non-technical abilities like project management, effective communication, and collaborative teamwork, exploring how these skills empower motion designers to not only create incredible work, but also excel within a team environment. Discover why proficiency in software is just the beginning and how developing a well-rounded skill set is crucial for long-term success in the dynamic world of motion design. That is a quite long intro. But without further ado, I want to introduce the guest today. Today we have a very special guest from Gretel, the head of design, Mulvaney.
Mulvaney, yeah.
Mulvaney, okay. Nailed it.
Yeah.
So
Not the influencer.
Not the influencer. Yes, I was Googling. I was like, ooh, that's the first thing that pops up. Yeah.
1,000 results.
Yeah, but so happy to and so excited to have you onto this episode.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, no, of course. Okay, so without further ado, I kind of wanted to just let you introduce who you are and what you do, and we just start from there.
Yeah. Cool. Let's see. So I'm head of design at Gretel.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. In October 8th, I'll have been here for 16 years. Which
wow. Congratulations.
Kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And Gretel's turning 20 in November.
Oh, wow.
So a bunch of anniversaries coming up.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I got into motion design kind of through graphic design.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
I studied kind of like traditional graphic design, identity design,
right,
at a school in the state I grew up in. I grew up in rural Iowa.
Oh, okay.
In a town of 500 people.
Oh, wow.
Very different than Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody in my small town had almost like storybook jobs. Like, my dad was a mechanic, my mom was a school teacher.
Yep.
Things that anyone would know about.
Mm-hmm.
There weren't any graphic designers or motion designers or artists even that I had met. But growing up over the years, I got interested in lots of different things that I later realized were related. So, of course, all kids are creative just by nature.
Right.
And my mom, being educated in early childhood development, did kind of a fantastic job bringing us all up in the kind of arts.
Yeah.
But as I got older, we got our first computer when I was in 5th grade.
Right.
We got the internet. That kind of like blew open my world.
Mm.
I got really interested in all of the things that you could do online, like creating websites, creating kind of terrible graphics with like, at first, just like MS Paint.
Right.
We had some software that came with our printer that you could make greeting cards and like holiday cards with and stuff.
Right.
Loved playing with all of that stuff. I got my first digital camera, I think like a year or so later. It was a Polaroid camera.
Oh, nice.
Digital. And it was 0.8 megapixels. Like
wow.
pixel.
Yeah.
So I would take kind of terrible photos with that and use the editing software that came with it. And without really knowing it, I was kind of starting to tip into graphic design. I was doing like CD covers for CDs I was burning for my friends and bad things like that. Yeah. Thankfully, none of this exists anymore. Advantages of growing up pre-social media.
Gotcha.
Sure. Other thing I got into as I got a little bit older was analog photography. I did a lot of like darkroom photography. So I really kind of dove deeper into photography first. That was kind of like the first medium that I really got to know and got fluent in.
I see.
When I was in high school and starting to think about what I wanted to go to college for, I did a job shadow, like a one-day, not even a full day, like a half-day job shadow at a local newspaper.
Right.
With what turns out to have been a graphic designer. I'd never heard the words graphic design before. So sitting with that person and kind of shadowing them for the day, I still vividly remember sitting next to them at their computer and he was talking about all the stuff that he has to do that he doesn't really enjoy. But he said, when I get to design something that goes into the website, and he was showing me like a banner with like some bad question marks and things on it. He's like, that's what I really enjoy. And I was like, what's that? What's that called? That's what I want to do. And he's like, that's called graphic design. So I started looking at like local colleges.
Right.
It wasn't an option for me to go to SCAD or any fancy art schools.
Yeah.
But luckily, there was a great design college inside Iowa State's broader college.
Okay.
So it had its own building, its own curriculum. Like a lot of design schools, it had a kind of a first year that was like based on the Bauhaus model, where you're doing all the different disciplines together. After that, you would put a portfolio together and apply to different programs within the school. So you could apply to just one. I just applied to graphic design because I knew that's what I was interested in.
Right.
You could apply to architecture, fine art, whatever.
Yeah.
As I started like building up the fundamentals of graphic design, motion design was kind of in its, I don't know, early awkward adolescence maybe at that point.
Yeah.
And it was something I was attracted to. There weren't any formal classes at my school about motion. So it's something that I kind of locked myself in a room one holiday break and started teaching myself, just looking at references, After Effects tutorials, like just trying to get familiar with the basics. I came out to New York between my junior and senior year and did 2 internships.
Oh, nice.
One of them was at a studio, Athletics, which is still around. Fantastic studio.
Right.
In Williamsburg in Brooklyn, just north of here. What I got out of that was that you can do kind of everything. There were people there who specialized in things, some of which were even motion. But there were also people that were more like what I was kind of imagining myself to be, which is like more of a kind of generalist graphic designer that is also fluent in motion. Can kind of animate or can kind of at least like direct motion and design for motion.
The
other internship, it was this small collective that doesn't exist anymore called Rad Mountain. And it was more of like a collection of individual freelancers. There were people there who did like textile design, stop motion animation, traditional kind of MoGraph animation, graphic designer who had been at Pentagram, like just this mix, lots of really great illustrators. So it was kind of the other side of the coin, seeing people who went like all the way down deep into like a specific personal style for most of them, and also like a specific medium that they're working in. So after that, I had one more year of school, studied abroad in Rome for the fall semester, came back for the spring semester and kind of polished up my portfolio. And then graduated right into a big recession.
Oh, wow.
So it came back.
Was that the '08?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
2008 was the recession. I was graduating in the summer of 2009.
Oh, no.
May of 2009.
Right. Okay.
But I was dead set on New York. I'd known I wanted to move out here since I was, an early teen. I visited once when I was 14. I was like, yes, this is where I'm moving.
Gotcha.
So I moved out here anyway. My littlest sister was graduating high school, so I stuck around for like 4 days or something. And I flew out here. Got a place with some other design kids that were at SVA, and then a few of my friends who didn't turn out here made the jump out here too later that summer. And that was kind of my introduction to motion design and the New York scene. I started poking around looking for work, of course, after that. Talking to people that I had met in my previous summer here. Some of them were at different jobs. Some of them had started studios that had folded. Like, it was kind of like a tumultuous time. But a friend of a friend of an acquaintance kind of level person that I knew through one of those internships was freelancing at Gretel. At the time, Gretel was a very small shop. It was Greg Hahn, who was the founder, principal. If design was coming out of Gretel, it was essentially done by him. There was also a staff animator at the time. And then a couple of like kind of permalance freelancers that were working with him.
Gotcha.
And I came in I always say as an intern, not
Right.
officially as an intern, but I was getting paid intern wages. There just wasn't like a formal program for it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
But you gotta grab every opportunity you got.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I loved Gretel's work. I loved that they were doing, kind of a little bit more rigorous graphic design oriented motion.
Right. Yes.
Rather than
Yes.
razzle dazzle, kind of driven by the latest trends motion.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
They were also doing identity work. Even at the time, they had just done a big rebrand for Bravo. When I came in, that was just wrapping up. I think I helped on the guidelines a little, and then Nick at Night and kind of subsequent Nickelodeon jobs were kind of what I started with.
Gotcha.
But it was a pretty squarely motion studio at the time.
Right. Right.
Doing a mix of mostly things for television, some things for film, and a little bit of kind of fun side quests.
Right. Yeah.
We used to do editorial illustrations for New York Magazine.
Oh, okay. I didn't know about that.
Little things like that.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, I was there freelancing for about 3 months, I think October through the end of the year. Around the holidays, Greg was just having dinner with me at a restaurant underneath Gretel. And he's like, "So, do you want to stay?" I was like, "Yeah, I do want to stay." And, yeah, I've been here for 16 years since. It's changed a lot in that time.
Yeah.
Of course.
That's amazing.
It's probably been like at least 3, maybe 5 different studios, essentially, for all intents and purposes.
Right.
Between the shifts and the type of work we do,
Right.
scope of projects, and of course, like the people who come through, the kind of waves of different.
Yeah. And now you have a location here. Like,
we jumped from that location, which was kind of on the border of Chinatown.
Oh, okay.
And Soho.
Right.
And Little Italy.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. My favorite spot in the city, by the way.
Yeah, it's so great.
Yeah.
We would pop down to lunch, get like $3 lunch in Chinatown.
I know. Yeah, the dumplings.
And then you could like go grab a shirt in Soho and you could like go out with friends.
Right.
And like Noho or whatever after.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great spot.
Yeah.
We moved from there up to Union Square, and we were there for like a dozen or so years, up to the pandemic, basically.
Oh, okay.
But pre-pandemic,
Right.
we had bought this building and done the renovations here, and we were meant to move into it.
Right. But the
A
pandemic.
couple of months after the pandemic kicked
Right.
off. But it ended up being, I think, March of 2023 that we actually all
Oh, okay.
got back in here together.
Oh, so this is like the most recent, like. Yeah. It's
So
only.
I think this is the third space, Gretel Spring.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I think maybe the most interesting thing, and one thing that might be different from other guests you've talked to, is the mix of work we do now.
Yeah.
We were a kind of straight ahead motion studio. And over the years, it very slowly but purposely changed.
Right.
We still do motion. Motion's still one of our kind of core expertises. But now motion is one component of a bigger suite of components.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Projects that we're doing. And it happened really gradually. It kind of grew out of doing these network rebrands.
Right.
If you spin a wheel and touch a network, we've probably rebranded it at least once. Done tons of those jobs together.
Yeah.
But yeah, rebranding networks led to the opportunity to rebrand Netflix, which I think was in 2013 or 14, maybe, that we did that. They had just started streaming.
Right.
They had just started producing their own content. I remember we were taking a tour there, and at the time, I think Orange is the New Black was out, and maybe one other show. And they were like, a year from now, we're going to be producing 50 shows. And a year from that, we're going to be producing 150 shows.
Wow.
All around the world. And we were like, yeah, right. Totally.
Ambitious. Yeah.
But it was true. And of course, they've grown into the behemoth that they were now.
Right. Yeah.
One thing that unlocked, I think, or maybe like codified, was our way of thinking about motion as part of a broader identity system.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
What we're always looking for now when we're doing an identity for anyone, whether it's a small bakery in Copenhagen or, a massive Fortune 500 company,
Right.
is some kind of signature behavior is how we describe it. So Netflix
Right. Sorry. What do you mean by the signature behavior?
Netflix is a really good example.
Right.
So all of the elements, whatever you're making decision about, whether it's behavior, color, the form of the logo, whatever.
Yeah.
Of course, you want that all to ladder up to some higher idea that's driving everything. For Netflix, that higher idea was that Netflix is this like living, infinite catalog. So Netflix is this living, infinite catalog. What structure should it have, and how should it move? Those are kind of components that we're always thinking about.
Yeah.
So you and I could brainstorm for 15 minutes and probably come up with 25 different
exactly.
options,
Right.
And then you could also come up with 5 different options for the design kind of choices for each of those. So
Yes.
there's no one right answer, but the answer that we landed on that I think worked well because of its kind of like singularity and its kind of almost like bulletproof nature. This set, if you imagine like a set of cards that we've fanned out on the table.
Yeah.
Different things can be printed on the cards, but they obey the laws of physics. And there's a camera above the cards that never moves.
Right.
It doesn't zoom in. It doesn't zoom out.
Yeah.
Fixed.
Right. Yeah.
Anything you can do in that setup is what we could do with this kind of catalog. So you could go kind of deliberately through 3 different shows. You could search through and find something way down in the pile.
Right. Yeah.
It gives you this structure and behavior that expresses the idea behind the brand in an intuitive way.
Right. So basically building like a systems for that. And
it's definitely like a systematic kind of principled way of thinking about it.
And it's about delivering their message through a very strategic and then structural way or approach.
Yeah. And it's different. What that is always different for different brands. Another just kind of like blunt example of that is we did a rebrand for this company, Noom, a couple of years ago.
Right.
And Noom's brand was all about helping people navigate to like a healthier lifestyle. So it has this nice keyword in it of navigate. Same thing. We could sit here for 15 minutes and bat ideas around about how to express that visually.
Yeah.
What's like the visual metaphor and the behavior that we can use to bring that idea to life.
Would you say, because you mentioned about Netflix and Noon, those 2 pieces kind of just shape your career in a way that you kind of, because I am interested in like your experience about like how you kind of start your motion design career, but like only after you graduated, I'm just curious about like, how is it your like professional career like develop over time? And
I think my idea at the time was to be at Gretel for a couple of years and kind of get like almost like a graduate school in motion education.
Right. Okay.
And then in my mind, I was thinking, okay, then I'll have to go find a place where I can like flex both of those muscles equally.
Right.
I've built up my motion muscles and I have my identity, graphic design muscles.
Right.
But then I'll have to find somewhere else to apply those skills. But so I guess to start, the first thing I learned is you can design for motion and not be an animator.
Yes.
And what I was interested in is designing for motion more than animation. So that was kind of the first distinction that I didn't realize when I was in school. But getting into the industry, I realized was an option. So that was the first decision I made. I kind of shut down the animation side of it and doubled down on the design side of it. It meant doing storyboards, essentially. So starting to get versed in telling stories over time.
Right.
At first, very basic things like if you're creating one frame and a frame next to it, something needs to change.
Yeah.
Probably kind of drastically so you can tell what's supposed to be happening.
Yeah.
Other things like, the difference between designing something that takes 5 seconds or something that takes 30 seconds.
Right.
Difference. Part of it is at the time at least, was learning a different language in terms of what you're designing for. So when I was in school, you know what a business card is, you know what a billboard is, the kind of basic places that graphic design is going to show up. but doing a lot of work for television, the kind of infrastructure of television is not something that like lay people are familiar with.
Right. Yeah.
So like,
it was kind
if I talk to my mom about a lower third, she doesn't know what that is.
Oh yeah.
Or if I talk to my dad about an end page, she doesn't know.
I'm even having a hard time explaining to my parents about what I'm doing. So they're like, "So you
confused.
do?" Yeah, they're like, "You do the animation?" It's like,
yes. They don't
yes and no.
really understand that these almost like interface elements are what you're making.
Right.
Transitional elements are what you're making.
Yeah.
The TV commercial, sometimes the TV commercial.
Yeah.
Not the TV show.
Yeah.
It's the other stuff that you don't think about.
Right. True.
You don't think about humans creating.
Yeah.
So yeah, part of it was also just getting familiar with the types of things I was creating, what the like typical version of them was, what the expectations were, what the limitations were.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And it takes a while just to kind of get familiar, and you know, at first you're just trying to learn how to play a good rock song.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then eventually you can improvise, you know,
I see.
do free jazz.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's funny that you kind of mentioned, like, you know, because I have the same experience in school. I think because we're like, you know, I entered college later than you are. And then the industry, of course, have been like shipping a little bit. So for us, we do have that kind of training about like, you know, like doing broadcast design or like, let's say social media design these days. And we know about what lower third is, what is like transition and, you know, like the mortise and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I think what was interesting was because after graduation, when I was doing freelance, I actually got an opportunity to do so. But then, you know, it was my first time actually doing it. So I was like, you know, I was freaking out. And I was like, this is not what I learned in school, you know? So yeah, I'm always just curious, like, you know, that kind of transition, like, how do you manage that, you know? Or you kind of just grow on the way? Or
I mean, it's definitely, at least for me, I think the best way to learn anything is just by doing it, like over and over and over and over again.
Yeah,
And you get better at it with experience. You get faster, you get more efficient.
Right.
You also need to learn about like the history of it, and see what other people are up to today.
Yeah.
So you can kind of take all that into account and try and get to some new language that you're always standing on the shoulders of what's come before. But you should always be trying to take it to a new place too. So early in your career, it's really just trying to get a hold on the basics. There's tons of other things you're learning because it's probably your first real job.
Exactly.
How do I interact with other people? What does it mean to really interact with clients?
Exactly.
There's a lot to learn.
Yeah. And then that's something that school doesn't teach you, like the soft skills, the communication.
Really.
Yeah, it's also
much
hard.
You need to learn to just get up to that.
I know, yeah. And then the gap is just huge, you know. I was and I feel so stressed when I just think about it, but then eventually, you know, you kind of figure it out on the way. So, I guess,
Yeah, I think the like learning curve, if you were to like plot out, not that you really ever could, but like the level of knowledge, school gets you here,
and then
your first years of practice, it's like and really the entire rest of your career, unless you're you know, living with your head in the ground, you're always learning from everything that you're working with and all the different experiences.
Okay, so speaking of soft skills, I do have a question that's kind of related to it. So what soft skills do you believe are most crucial for a motion designer or, you know, as a creative in this case, you know, like for their long-term success and why? So,
A couple of things come to mind. It's not necessarily a soft skill, but something that I think is important is just a level of like curiosity, kind of an innate curiosity that drives you. If you're not curious, I mean, there's so many other jobs you could be doing. So
true.
So much of what makes our job interesting and fun is that, at least if you're at a studio and not in-house, but over the course of your career, no matter what, you're going to do work for lots of different people, lots of different organizations. The subject matter, the industry, all of those things are always changing. So because you're kind of being like a ghost writer, ghost designer for these other people, you need to really learn about things that you're designing or animating for. So part of the fun is just having as part of your job the excuse to learn about different people, different places, different things. curiosity is also good for any kind of like growth for yourself, of course.
Right. Yeah.
Curiosity led me to motion. Curiosity leads me to all kinds of things around design or outside of design that end up influencing the work that I do. That's another thing you learn with time. I think when you're in school, you're just worried about the fundamentals.
Yes.
You're like laser focused on your craft.
Mm-hmm.
The more comfortable you get with that and the more kind of easily you can work in the medium that you've chosen, the more I think you're able to zoom out a little bit and look around more and pull in more interesting influences. I heard there's this surrealist artist that I love. Her name's Leonora Carrington. And I read a great quote of hers recently. She said, the artist has to be with one eye looking through a microscope and with their other eye be looking through a telescope.
Wow.
It's a very beautiful poetic way of saying a thing that we talk about here all the time, which is this idea of thinking about everything at different levels.
Right.
Like macro level, meso level, and a micro level. So always zooming in and out. Thinking about problems you're solving that way.
Right.
Looking at all the details, but not getting lost in the trees and looking at the wider view of the project too. Looking at things from your perspective, from the client's perspective, from the audience's perspective. All of that I feel like is, innately, secretly driven by curiosity. I think drive in itself is also really important. You have to be motivated internally. Same thing. They're kind of linked. They're kind of two sides of the same coin, but it's not solving math problems.
Right.
Like
there's no like right or wrong answers.
Yeah, there's not really a right or wrong answer, like truly a right or wrong answer.
Right.
There are things that are probably more appropriate or less appropriate solutions.
Yeah.
I guess there are completely wrong answers. Short of that, they're kind of like hack answers and easy answers.
Right.
Answers that aren't unique. So much of what we're trying to do when we're creating something is creating something that's a really unique one-of-one expression, whether it's in motion or
design
form. A really unique one-of-one expression that's custom tailored to the person that we're making it for the context that it's going to be used in. You should, in an ideal world, not be able to take that solution and hand it to somebody else and have it work as well for them. So we're like, I don't know, we're like tailors working on Savile Row in the 50s in London or something. Like the German Baroness comes to us wanting a ball gown for, a certain event in a certain color, and we're measuring the length of each arm. We know the context, that what would be appropriate for that context. We know the history, et cetera, and we're creating this very custom thing that only fits her this special occasion.
That's quite interesting, because I thought you guys only do like design work or motion. You know what I mean? Because sometimes when I feel about like being a creative, it's also like you can literally apply all the skills you learn into anything.
Totally. That's also part of the beauty of the curiosity.
And I think that kind of circles back to you talking about curiosity, because sometimes that's how you grow, right?
Absolutely. Just as an example, so that's another reason I wanted to move to New York. Now I could have stayed, technically, if I was growing up now, I could have stayed in rural Iowa and even worked remotely with New York studios. But part of the fun of living in New York is being just immersed in this like buzzing hub of culture. The Athens of America. So last night, just as an example, I biked from here down to Prospect Park, and I went to a little theater production. There's this theater group that I love called Bread and Puppet Theater. It's based out of Vermont. It actually started in New York, but for the last 50-something years, it's been in Vermont. Started by this guy, Peter Schulman, who's a really, really interesting guy. But if you saw one of their shows in the 70s, say, and you saw the show that we saw last night,
Right.
Part of what's inspiring about it to me, apart from all of the other things I'm attracted to about it,
Yep.
is they have this kind of visual language that persists through all those years.
Wow.
And it's very beautiful. It's kind of like lo-fi, crude, cardboard paint, markers. Their typography is amazing. But it's all done by different people. And
Right.
the constants are the people that are directing it. But I highly doubt they're telling people, emulate this style that we've done over here. I think it's because they're working with similar materials over all those years.
Right.
They're working under similar, probably, budget constraints because it's an independent, self-funded theater troupe. They're working with the same medium for similar purposes. So it's kind of all those like baked in constraints or principles that give them the same output. So it's like an inspiring thing to see, just for the design of everything, like the costumes and the banners. They do a lot of banners. They actually sell books and things afterwards too. On top of the other things that I appreciate, like the messages and the comedy and everything else that's baked into it.
Yeah, that's really nice.
So something like that.
Yeah.
As you're sitting there looking at this style, it's like one more thing that you're adding to your kind of knowledge that who knows when it's going to be helpful.
Exactly.
12 years from now when I'm designing a bakery, or it might be helpful 2 years from now when I'm doing exhibition design and I have to think about something spatial.
That is really interesting, because I know you also kind of mentioned about you do have some interest, outside of like, let's just say like doing design, graphic design, or motion design. And I think it's important, because I think for a lot of us who just graduated from college, we had a problem of this. Of course, we need to find something, right? We need to find a job that's probably in the industry. So we're trying to figure it out. But like a lot of time we overlook the fact that, sometimes you also need to have this kind of input to kind of help you, And then you're not doing it because you have to, because you love it, or you're curious about it.
It can be high or low. Like, don't fall into the trap that it can only be like fine art references or something. We just did a project that comes out in a couple weeks, and the motion behavior in that project is inspired by kind of like street level motion. So if you imagine walking around any big city, what do you see for motion? You see like an LED scroll on like a food cart. Or you see kind of crappy transitions on like big screen TVs that are leaning in the window of a store or grocery store or whatever. So we were creating this purposely kind of like lo-fi vernacular motion language. Not because we're interested, even though it's like secretly one of my interests. But because it was a really appropriate fit for the idea of this project that was about bringing together kind of like high and low. But in terms of like other interests, I've also been getting really into architecture, mostly modern architecture, the last 10, 12 years or so. That's something that I've been learning a lot about just in my free time, been traveling a lot to go see. Doing tours, lectures, anything I can, reading books. And one thing that came out of that recently, for years and years and years, I was going to things through some of these organizations that are like Docomomo's one in New York. That's about historic preservation of modern architecture. Architecture's moved on, like the core of modernism is 40, 50 years behind us at this point. So there are all these organizations that want to preserve modernism, same way we want to preserve Grand Central. You don't want to live in a homogenous city where everything looks the exact same. You want to create history and texture. And what that led me to think about in design is kind of like a growing jealousy of the protections that they have for architecture. So when Penn Station fell in the 1960s in New York, that started the historic preservation movement for architecture. That's why Grand Central is still there. It was in the same situation that air rights changed. being kind of based on short-term profit motive.
Yeah.
They knocked down Penn Station and put like a bland tower in its place.
Yeah.
And Grand Central, instead, they saved Grand Central and they built a tower over top of it.
Right.
To kind of like split the difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
That kicked off a big, long kind of movement that led to like legal protections at all kinds of different levels.
Right.
And systems that have flexibility built into them so that if something reaches this extremely high bar of being like a true landmark, like Grand Central is, that we can know that it'll be there for future generations and be part of the culture of New York.
Right.
I think there are pieces of graphic design and I'm sure motion design that if we created an analog to this system, would also reach that high bar. Most of graphic design, unlike architecture, is meant to be transient.
Right.
It's created for a short-term purpose, or at best, kind of a medium-term purpose.
Right.
Then it goes away.
Yeah.
That's fine. We all accept that. That's what it's for.
Right.
But there are things that I think stick around for a reason and become a broader part of culture. And they kind of grow beyond their initial purpose, their kind of initial, mostly usually commercial purpose. So two of the things that I've been thinking about this with recently are, and they're New York examples because I know New York well. One of those things is the Vignelli system for subway signage and the whole MTA really in New York City. Part of what makes it a good example is it's a system. It's not one element. I think also part of why it's a good example is because it's a physical thing. It's closer to architecture. It's something you can see. It's in a certain place. It's not in another place. So when you think about preserving something, it's easier to imagine preserving something.
It's literally something that we use every day as a New Yorker.
And I think it ticks all the criteria that we could set out for being a landmark. Like its relevance to like the broader culture, not just the thing designers are fixated on. It's iconic of certain periods in design, kind of like high modernism. And another one that I've been thinking about a lot is the I Heart New York logo. I like that example to contrast the Vignelli subway system because it's the opposite in a lot of ways. It's a single thing. It's an element. There's no one version of it. It's reproducible. So rather than, the Vignelli system is iconic because it's a system. So it's the interrelation between things that you would want to preserve. For the I Heart New York logo, it's the kind of like essence of the logo itself. So there are characteristics that the logo has that you wouldn't want to change or it would eventually break the logo.
It's almost like a symbol already, right?
It's totally like the yellow cab, like the Vignelli subway system. It's a symbol for New York. It's a part of like civic image and civic identity now. And it's also a good example because it was created as kind of a like one-off for a campaign in the 70s. And it got adopted by the city and has grown into something that's now it's on every bus, literally on every bus in the city. You see T-shirts. Literally last night at that bread and puppet thing, someone had a version that just said "I heart" and then it was blank, which I liked. So preservation for graphic design. I know it sounds kind of weird at first because of the ephemeral nature of graphic design. But I think is important. And it's something that I'm hoping other people will get into too.
That was definitely a very interesting like perspective to see into it. Because for me, I never think about design can be so powerful and then to, even talk about preservation of it. I think it's like anything. If you go to the Met, a lot of what you're looking at, if you go to like the older sections of the Met, you're looking at like people's spoons, things they rested their head on. Like, it's not high art. It's essentially archaeology. There's a spectrum of things you can value. It doesn't have to be one thing or another. Well, that's a lot to take in for me. I needed to do a little thinking about it though. But that was definitely
boxes to put dead people in. Could be anything.
Yeah, no, wow. Okay. Yeah. Never think about that. Okay. So I know right now you're currently working at Gretel as a head of design, right?
Yeah.
So are you managing like the graphic design team or also the motion design or
Yeah.
Yeah. I just
Yeah,
kind of
so
yeah.
as head of design,
Yep.
I'm working with everyone on our design team, which you're right. It's part traditional straight ahead graphic
Yeah.
designers.
Right.
It's part pure motion specialists. And then there are some people that are unicorns and can do a little bit of both.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So yeah, it's managing our design team,
Right.
working across all the different projects that come in the studio. I still do design
Okay.
like any other designer does.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I'll create directions for a new brand product that comes in. Sometimes I'm doing that. Sometimes I'm just overseeing on a project.
Right.
It's a mix, and I'm always trying to balance kind of like this breadth of things to give attention to and the kind of depth that each of them need or deserve.
Right.
So yeah, it just depends on
Yeah.
what the project is and what the team makeup is, how involved they end up getting.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. So I do have a follow-up question for that. So how do you approach collaborative teamwork in your motion design projects, and what are some best practice you have found effective?
Yeah. So collaborating in our studio is pretty natural. We're here in person Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays.
Oh, that's amazing.
Thursdays and Fridays, it's optional. You can come in.
Okay.
Or you can work from anywhere you want. So for us, we're all working downstairs in a big open studio.
Yeah.
We'll generally meet with the project team in the morning and talk about what each of us are going to work on for the day, set some goals for ourselves, talk a little bit like slightly longer term about the next presentation that we're working towards.
Right.
Generally after that, everyone will break apart and go work on the pieces that they're working on. A lot of times during the day, I'll kind of move around desk to desk, just sit next to people, see how it's going, help troubleshoot things, maybe connect to people that are working on similar problems. And then a lot of times towards the end of the day, we'll do another meeting where we get back together and review like the progress that we made today, to kind of a more formal critique. And then that tends to be the cycle that we go through during the week leading up into a presentation.
Okay.
So we're generally working, kind of focusing on between here and the next presentation.
Right.
The team is, and my job is to also be zooming out, kind of thinking ahead.
I see. Yeah, because the reason why I asked this question was because I actually got an inquiry from students, and they were just curious about what it's actually like, working in a professional setting, and then everybody wants to understand that kind of like career ladder that they can climb kind of thing. So yeah, it's like I feel like for me, because that is like after out of school and then after you actually working, you understand this kind of like structure, and then I always appreciate the chance to kind of look into like an in-house studio team, because like I would say pretty much everybody has same structure, but like for me, because I work remotely almost for over the past year as a freelancer, so you don't really have that kind of like experience of like working in house and then just learning from your peers, that kind of thing. Everything just monitors.
Totally.
Right.
That was like a new thing for me, and I'm sure lots of people during the pandemic.
Right.
I think that like learning almost through osmosis just by being around people is important always, but I think especially helpful and important early in your career. It's how I learned everything. I learned everything I know through all the people that I worked with over the years, and I'm still learning from them literally every single day. So it's kind of like a cheat code to work in person. But for us, I'm sure different people have different titles, but just in terms of like a career progression, we have interns. We generally have 2, maybe 3 design or motion interns at any given time. We do 3-month internships, and it starts in January. So every 3 months, starting in January, a new kind of cohort of interns come in.
Gotcha.
And that's almost always how we find our junior designers, which is kind of like the first level after school that you would be working at. Junior fill in the blank. Junior designer, junior motion designer, whatever it is.
Mm.
Then for us, after that comes just designer or just motion designer.
Mm-hmm.
Then
Senior,
senior,
right,
then associate version,
right.
and then the director version,
Mm-hmm.
and then if needed, the executive director version. So
Okay. Yeah.
there's not a ton of different roles, and they're parallel for us across the whole studio. So the same for a project manager or anything
I
else.
see. Right.
Just makes it very kind of clear and easy,
Yeah.
easy to track.
Right. Yeah.
And we have like an elaborate role grid where you can look at,
Right.
say you're a junior designer just starting out at Gretel.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at that grid, look across all the different kind of criteria that you're like responsible for things in and growing within.
Right.
And you can look, what is that, what does it mean design wise for a junior designer, say?
Right. Yeah.
There's some things like, covering the fundamentals of design, working with type.
Right.
And then you can look up the role chart, and it's fantastic because you can see what design means for a senior designer. You can see what design means for a creative director.
Right.
And it just gives you a look into those other roles, and it gives you kind of goals, things to work on.
Right. Yeah.
And just a peek into your potential futures.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing, because I feel like that's also important for people to understand, like what it is to work in a studio,
Yeah. I think in a studio environment, the biggest switch is when you go from senior designer,
right?
If you want to, you don't have to, of course.
Yeah.
I know people that purposely stay at senior designer, but if you do want to make the jump between just designing or just animating,
right,
into more also managing people, that for us is the difference between a senior designer, say, or a senior motion designer, and like associate creative director or associate motion director. That's when you kind of purposely have made the jump and to kind of widen out your scope of responsibility to include more kind of like project management stuff, team management stuff.
Right.
Still, senior designers are doing that to an extent, but you're kind of doubling down on it at that point.
I see. Okay. Yeah. No. Okay. Yeah, interesting. Because for me, I don't really have any in-house experience, so like,
yeah,
I mean, I really wish maybe one day I would get that, but for now, freelance is also not bad. You're gonna learn on the way. So.
Yeah, freelancing is great.
Yeah.
Freelance is great, either at the start or if you're more established, because you get to see so many different places. If you're bouncing around between studios and in-house places, you can really quickly, with one or two bookings, get a feel for a studio, get a feel for their process.
Right.
It's kind of like dating. You can be like, okay, now I know I don't want that.
Yeah, exactly.
or I like that.
Yeah,
Maybe I'll stick around.
Right.
Or,
yeah.
It can just help you hone in. Internships are great for that reason too, because it's just a quick hit of experience.
Right.
And then you can go somewhere else and do it again.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. No, okay. Yeah. So I think next I kind of want to talk about soft skills, since this is kind of like the topic of today's episode. I mean, as a head of design, of course, you've been seeing over a lot of like interns or like junior level designers in the past. And then what would be some advice that you think you can get like for someone, let's say someone who just graduated or like aspiring motion designer, about, soft skills or like even any kind of skills outside of your work itself, and then basically
one of the important things, and you get better at it through your career, and it's the same thing we talked about earlier, it's just experience, kind of repetition and practice, but learning how to talk about your work with other people is really helpful and really important. When you're just starting out, it's mostly going to be internal. It's going to be when you and I are getting together at the beginning or at the end of the day, talking about not just the technical parts of your work, but you have to be able to talk about that. It's also why you're doing the things, the kind of higher order ideas and concepts that you're trying to express. You start to learn that in school through like your pinups and your critiques. And it's more or less the same way of interacting and talking. But you're just doing it in kind of more rich circumstances when you're working with lots of other people. When you're in school, you're generally kind of an island of one. you're also your own client and your own
Exactly.
creative director.
Right.
So it's different when you start collaborating with
Very
teams
different.
of people.
Right. Yeah.
But it's also really rewarding working with teams of people. There's this classic experiment where they give a list of different items to people, and they have people rank, like, if you're going to pick 5 of the items from this list to survive in the woods, which would you pick and what order would you rank them? If you give that list to any individual person, even an expert survivalist, they come up with kind of like like a B plus kind of answer at best.
Oh,
but if you give it to a group of people, they always come up with a better answer.
Oh, interesting.
Because of the power of discussing things.
Right.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
The kind of hive mind generally comes up with a kind of richer, more considered idea than any one individual can.
I see. Okay. So I guess this is another question that I feel everybody wants to know, but I mean, it's kind of hard to answer, but I guess I'll just ask, like, so what will be a studio seeking in someone who just graduated in terms of, like, not just their skills, but, like, I guess, like, everything, because right now, it's kind of tough to
I sympathize because I graduated into a similar job market.
Right. So, like, we kind of have the pretty much same experience. For me, I always wanted to work in house, but, like, I know, like, maybe I haven't got to that point. So, I started freelancing and everything, and then I was fortunate enough to have something for me to rooted for me. So, I guess just a lot of people are curious about, like, what it is like, and then how a studio actually find like the right person for that job.
I can go kind of through the process.
That would be great.
So we get, of course, I'll stick to an internship just because we go through it a lot. But this applies to anything. And we just kind of put offers out to our latest interns, so it's very top of mind. So the process is generally, you have a field of candidates represented by their portfolios, their resumes, and an email maybe. They get to you all kinds of different ways. Some of it's a friend passing it to you. Some of it is someone writing to us. Some of it is, I was at a school and now someone's following up. All kinds of different ways. But they all kind of go into one big group that you start to evaluate. So first thing that I look at, everyone's going to go about this a different way, but I can tell you how I go about it. The first thing I do is look at people's work, of course. We're designers and motion designers. We have a tangible output that we can show. Most job interviews or people that are up for a job don't have that. So it's a really fantastic shortcut. So at first, I'll just kind of metaphorically lay them all out, look at all of the work, and do a first kind of culling down just based on the work, whether or not it's kind of like in the right area. Sometimes we'll get applications. Say we're looking for an animator. We might get applications of people who are doing tons of beautiful cell animated work. That's great. I love that stuff. They're just not going to be able to apply to the skills of Gretel. So they should go talk to Buck or somebody else who does that a lot. So some people are just not the right fit. Other work just isn't up to our standards, which are kind of artificially high. So that kind of, I don't know, maybe calls 50% of people, but generally there are tons of great candidates. With very strong work.
Then how do you set them apart? That's the question.
Then I think you can start looking at people's experience. Have they done an internship before? What kind of school program are they coming out of? But I personally try not put too much stock in that. I'm not going to be swayed by fancy school versus state school or something. I come out of a state school, so to me, it's more about the person and the work than credentials like that. After that, what we'll do is we'll just start talking to people. And if you're talking to us and probably anyone else that you're ever talking to, you've already gotten through those 2 hoops. So don't be self-conscious about your work. They love your work or they wouldn't be talking to you.
True.
And they're interested in you for the level of experience. Seems like a good fit that way. So really, especially with something like an internship, it's less about, what they've done and more about their kind of them as a person, soft skills, personality.
Right.
And it's also about kind of like the potential that you see in them. So when so I was talking about if you're already talking to someone, they already like your work.
Yeah.
And the experience level is right. So you don't have to worry about those things.
Right.
When I'm talking to somebody in like an interview setting,
Yeah.
First of all, I don't really get the approach that some interviewers take. I don't think it happens too much in design, but I don't know if you're a lawyer interviewing for a job, they ask you like all these hard questions and try and trick you, and like it's this kind of adversarial thing.
Yeah.
I always try and make it the opposite. Like I'm always trying to make it just a conversation.
And I always appreciate that because you have no idea like how many like that kind of interview they had, and it's like they just give you like
it's such a questions technique.
Yeah, it's just like
technique.
I'm a creative person. Like don't ask me something like like I don't know.
Real person. Like me, you want to see the real person that might be kind of joining the family that you're going to see for 8 hours a day.
Right. But I do understand because most of the time, like the interviewer, they're like HR person, so they don't really get to know that much. So
anyway, I try and make it as like kind of informal and casual as possible. I still have like purposeful things I'm trying to get out of it. But, I want them to be like very comfortable, and I want to see their true personality. And get like normal kind of conversational answers out of them, not something that they've prepared that they're like just waiting to say. So a lot of what I think that first and maybe only for an internship interview is about is their personality and the potential that you see in them. It comes through in different ways. Like it comes through in how they talk about their work, back to like the importance of learning how to talk about your work. And just practicing it more than anything. It comes through in even things like now I've started asking like what people's hobbies are, like even outside of design. It shows something about a person's curiosity. Are they tinkering with, I don't know, creating aquariums or
something anything,
and it just shows that they're like kind of tuned in and interested in different
and
things.
invested.
If it's so cool, I don't know, there's a designer that used to work here who was really into like building out like lo-fi technology. Like playing with 8-bit screens and soldering and stuff. That's cool on its own merits. It's cool because it could come into a project in some way. But it's mostly cool because it shows that they have other interests outside of design, and that they're kind of like a curious person. And that they're always learning and experimenting. That kind of like inner drive to play and experiment, I think is really, really important. So that's kind of the thing that I'm always looking for. Drive that I was talking about earlier, is something I'm always looking for, which is related. In terms of work, I guess back to evaluating people's work, one thing that I think is really important is just like in life, a first impression.
Of course.
So when a very like practical thing that I think people should think a lot about is when someone goes to your website or opens up your Figma link or whatever it is, what's the very first thing or the first few things that they're going to see? And I think it's really helpful to me when I'm looking through lots of portfolios to see a broad, rich overview. The kind of basic version is just a lot of thumbnails or thumbnails and GIFs representing projects, cutting across lots of different things. If someone sends me a portfolio and it's like kind of hard to get that view, or you kind of can't get that view, it's very difficult. It could be purely with motion. It could be like a reel. A reel does that job very quickly. But a great overview of your greatest hits is really, really important. Things that I'm looking for in graphic design and in motion design, at least the type of motion design we're doing, is good use of typography. Super important. Typography is really our one thing that only we do. Other people, interior designers and painters deal with color. Other people deal with motion. Other people deal with other things. But type is really truly ours.
Okay. I'm making a note right now.
Important. The other thing generally is layout,
Right.
composition, super, super important. Kind of innate in everything we do, whether it's moving or still.
Right.
One thing that we look for in motion is partly having being able to intuit a reason that the motion is happening, back to like a kind of concept driving your behavior being important. And the other thing is that the motion feels like logical,
Right.
the best way to describe it. But a lot of times we'll talk about
like the purpose of
that
motion.
there's a kind of like a causal relationship between things.
Right. Like, why do you do this? And then
if I don't know, bad example, but if you're animating two things and one kind of goes this way, one goes this way.
Yeah.
There's a relationship there.
Right.
It feels like meaningful and purposeful.
Right.
One doesn't go this way, and then this one, I don't know,
goes
zooms up and zooms back.
Right.
And then does this. Like, if over the course of time you start to build these relationships between things, it starts to feel almost like a mechanical system.
Right.
Or like magnetic attraction. Or you have to come up with some like laws or principles in your head that govern the motion.
Right. Yeah.
And it's usually some kind of like causal relationship. It's usually related to the bigger metaphor that you're using.
Right.
So if it's a stack of cards, that means they're sliding, one obscures the other. There's friction on the table, so they ease to a stop. All of those things.
Right.
They're not like rockets going at a totally even, very fast pace.
Right.
Those are the sorts of things. And I think, funnily enough, a lot of those metaphors tend to be like physical ones. I don't know if that's how humans think. Is relating everything to the physical world.
Right. Of course,
it doesn't. Like seeing faces.
Easier to visualize, I guess. Yeah.
But yeah, lots of times we're actually thinking about motion through some physical kind of metaphor. So yeah, I think it's important in your work just to hit those different notes, like clear purpose and concept behind things, and then kind of early, at least, mastery of the different elements.
Okay. Well, that's really helpful and useful, I think.
Yeah.
For me as well.
It's not earth-shattering, but that's truly what I was looking at.
No. I think, that's amazing, because I feel like it just kind of helps me also breaks down like what I need to work on,
Yeah.
It's like step by step, like, okay. So
the very last tip of the iceberg, 80% is what we were talking about.
Right.
The last 20% is just how you show your work.
True. Like
the design of the portfolio itself. If things are going into mock-ups, how well that's done.
Right. Yeah.
But I think a lot of people put too much weight into that part of it. It's important, and you should do it.
Right.
But the majority of your focus should be on the actual thing itself.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah.
If it's good enough work, you could just swipe through it on your phone and then achieve the same effect.
Right. Yeah. No, that's really helpful. Yeah. Okay, I think that's pretty much everything that I want to cover today.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, no, thank you for being here and then spending time, talking to me for an hour or so. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've been watching the episodes that have aired thus far, and I'm just glad you're doing this. It's a good resource that I wish I would have had when I was just starting out my career as well.
Thank you for saying that, because I do want to help more people, especially students. So it's also like helping me myself at the same time. So
yeah. And if anyone who's listening is interested in an internship,
definitely.
There's a link on our site. I think our email is just
I'll put it down.
See in the show.
Yeah, the link below. Yeah, in the description. Yeah,
the affiliate link.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's an email address where you can get in touch with us. Definitely reach out. Every 3 months, we're looking for new interns.
Nice.
I think it's a valuable experience and a good way
for sure.
To ease into the industry.
Yeah, I would die for just intern here. So people just grab the opportunity
Yeah,
when you can.
It's not too late.
It's not too late. Okay, all right.
Yeah, freelance as well.
Yeah.
Anyone who's interested in either of those, definitely
Sounds
reach out.
good. Yeah. All right. Thank you again, and I'm gonna end the episode.